I am with the John Glatt, a true crime author. You have written how many books, John, now?
I've written 30 at the moment, yes.
30. Many well-known crimes that you've taken on. The Turpin Children,
Yeah,
J.C. Dugard,
yes.
Chris Watts,
That's right, yes. And the
and
Cleveland abductions.
the Cleveland abductions. That one was a fascinating one to me. I had lived near there for a bit of time. And and now Lori Vallow Daybell. You just released a book, The Doomsday Mother. Is that the right title?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I wanna thank you for doing this interview, with Hidden True Crime, and, I have so many questions. I've read the book. I thought you did a great job with research and talking to people. I enjoyed the book, so thank you for your hard work, and, were you a journalist before you decided to write true crime novels?
Many years. I mean, I'm from London, England originally, and I started off on local newspapers around London area and moved to New York around 40 years ago and been working ever since. And got into books only about, I think it was about 30 years ago. I wrote my first book, which had nothing to do with true crime at all. It was on the rock and roll impresario Bill Graham in San Francisco. So,
And then you switched to true crime after that, or how did the
uh,
true crime begin?
I did a few other music books. I did stuff like the authorized biography of the chieftains. I also did some biographies of River Phoenix, the Monaco royal family, and I kind of fell into true crime, because I had a friend that was a true crime writer who introduced me to, some of, his publisher and his agent. And in fact, I've always had a fascination with true crime. And, it sort of lent to everything I'd learned, as a journalist, research and uh, talking to people and everything like that. So it was kind of a natural progression, really.
Okay, thank you for explaining that, and I do wanna get into your recent book. Clearly, what we do here is follow the Daybell case intensely, but before that, I do have some questions about uh, this true crime business you're in. It's, the author that you are. I have to say this, a lot of women follow true crime, less so men. Anne Rule was a true crime writer. She's a woman. My husband, John Matthias, definitely is fascinated with true crime, but I'm always interested to ask a man, what is it that draws them to crime?
Well, I mean, I just think it's such a fascinating subject to see what people do and usually how they try and get away with it. And it's just something I find very, very interesting. I read a lot of Anne Rule books. She was my hero, really, in true crime. Before I ever wrote a true crime book, I read Anne Rule and things. And to me, she was the lodestone for it. I just think it's a fascinating subject, what makes people do what they do. And I mean, the Laurie Vallow Chad Daybell case is a perfect example of that. I mean, that's just unbelievable and something you just couldn't, stranger than fiction, definitely.
To say the least. In fact, let me start with this. I read your whole book, and at the very end, I'll pull it up here on my phone. I have your ebook. At the very end, you said something that I felt was kind of profound. In my many years of writing true crime books, I have never seen another case as terrifying as that of Lori Vallow Daybell. It simply defies logic. I thought that was fascinating knowing all the books I've already mentioned that you've written about, all these crimes that you've written about in your you've never seen, though, another case as terrifying as that as Lori Vallow Daybell.
Not with these kind of the idea that a mother who everybody says, I mean, Larry and Kay Woodcock say they thought she was the perfect mother. for years would resort to, allegedly, I should say, since she hasn't come to trial yet, you know, uh, being behind the murder of her own two children, her spouse, and also Chad Daybell, his wife of 29 years. And it's just, to me, it was just unfathomable, whatever. And it really was, and it was terrifying. I think the way that Chad Daybell had this very dedicated group of followers, and I think there were a lot more than really came out. There's probably, they were, on the internet, they're scattered all around the world, probably, that followed his teachings, followed his Preparing a People podcasts and everything like that, who absolutely believed in every word he said and thought he had been sent by God, to help them, to the second coming. To me, the idea of normal people believing that was terrifying,
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. I think that for me, I found the same, it was the same draw. How could this happen? I remember for me, seeing the first AP article. I was a journalist too, and a news junkie, and it came up that there were two missing children. And I saw these two seemingly normal looking people, and I thought, this isn't going to end well. And what is this? This is going to be big. So, right. And it has been exactly that. It's been terrifying.
Yeah.
So,
And those kind of, where are the children? For months, where are the children? And Laurie and, so glibly, didn't want to take questions on it. And just the way it played out was just, to me, unbelievable, really.
yeah. You said you mentioned that one thing you like about true crime is it's fascinating to you how people try to get away with it. Is there anything in particular about that question that fascinated you about this case?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think Laurie and Chad, they thought the end of the world was coming. What was it, July 2020, And they really believed that. And they thought they were going to get away with it. I think even when they were arrested, I just would have loved to have been in the jail cell that day when the end of the world didn't happen with, what they came up with then, But yeah, I think they always thought that. I think they probably still think they'll get away with it. I mean, the latest I saw, isn't Chad Daybell trying to get all the charges overturned, the last hearing a couple of days ago? I mean, he probably still believes that he's going to get out.
Right, right. And I recently heard from someone who was in jail temporarily with Chad Daybell, who said that he considers himself like Jesus Christ or Joseph Smith, and that he's being imprisoned sort of like the Mormon founder Joseph Smith was. Yeah, a martyr. So, right, exactly. And I love what you just said there too. A lot of people say they didn't really believe it. They didn't really believe it, and this was just about money, sex, greed, and they made it all up. But you're saying they really believed it.
Well, I think up to a certain point, take Melanie Gibb, when they started police started knocking on doors and things and asking these questions about where are the children, and Laura's giving some very glib thing. Oh, I'm keeping them hidden for their own protection because there's kind of evil forces out to get them. I think it came to a point where these people realized, they got scared. I think when the police got involved,
Right, right. They did. Um, I know, and the things that they did to try to get away with it. I mean, Chad, tell me if you agree. I mean, he wasn't the smartest.
Oh, no, hardly.
Okay.
Yeah,
And he told his parents that Tylee had died a year earlier. Is that right? I read that in your book.
I think he said he was an empty nester or something. Laurie
Yeah,
was
she was an empty nester and her daughter had died, and then she told somebody else a different story and somebody else a different story. I mean,
right. And it's
he
funny
wasn't
in that thing with that when they secretly interviewed Rob Wood. I think when he was interviewing
Summer, right?
Summer. Yeah, and he says that Chad isn't that smart. He basically knew that. And
Right, but you can manipulate people. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
I mean, I don't know. I read some of his books, just as research or whatever, and his autobiography, and some of it's quite plain, it's so, infantile, really, and it's not very sophisticated.
Well said. Right. We have read it too. I've read it more than once,
Hmm.
unfortunately. Yeah. Right. I mean, and I'm grateful that he left us with his autobiography. It helps us understand him a little bit more. But right, it's
Yes.
very simple.
There were certain things in it that I thought were very kind of important, poignant. I mean, just as a little boy, when he's walking through this garden and he sees these bees and he starts stamping them dead one by one till, he's done he counts 120, and then his grandfather comes out of the sky to tell him not to do it. I mean, things like that. There was something kind of really dark and evil about Chad, I think, from the beginning, that people that saw him didn't get, because I spoke to a lot of people that knew him when he worked for the newspaper. Some of the journalists, I spoke to his editor and another sports reporter that was on the desk, and they just thought he was just plain strange, but really, really nice, a good family man, but very, very quiet. And they thought it was something weird in how quiet he was, actually, didn't mix with anyone.
Right. You interviewed cult expert Rick Ross for this,
Yes.
and you seem to imply that Chad was the cult leader. Do you want to explain that a little bit? You also imply though that Lori was the action-oriented one. She was kind of this driving force, but that Chad was the cult leader. What kind of dynamic do you see with them?
Well, I mean, Rick, I interviewed him for my Turpin book too, so I'd spoken to him in the past, and he basically said that it was a cult of two, Chad and Laurie, basically. And that's what it reached down to. I think Chad had, he was very good at, he had a charisma, I think, he could project himself from the stage, and he really could get people to believe in him. I spoke to people that went to some of his talks, at preparing a people, and they were mesmerized by, what he said and whatever. Although I saw some of the video from those, with North Vietnam and Kim Jong-sun, which is kind of a bit pathetic. But people really did believe him, I think. And I think with Laurie, I mean, the dynamic was, I think she had a very unhappy life, really. She came from a broken, her family was very strange, her upbringing was a bit weird and whatever. And she went through a succession of husbands. She was always kind of on her own, really, with Colby and then with Colby entirely. And
Mhm.
I think that she was always looking for something. And then, Chad sort of basically told her that she had all these special powers and she'd been chosen, to lead the 144,000 with him, like the king and queen of this, new age, when the world died, they would be reigning. And I think it really fed into, her head. She loved that kind of idea of her being above everybody else and raining down with Chad. And I think it fed into that. And as for Chad, I mean, I think he was, he wasn't the best looking guy. He had been in this marriage for 29 years. I spoke to a few people that knew him that said the marriage wasn't that happy, towards the end. Basically, Chad took all these big decisions, like without even asking Tammy, like we're moving to Rexburg because I had this vision. And poor Tammy didn't even know about it until it slips out when they're having dinner one day. And
Right.
I don't think they had much of a physical relationship or whatever. So I think when Laurie suddenly came along and was like a groupie, and who loved his writings, Chad suddenly saw this opportunity of being with this really beautiful, good-looking woman, and that fed his kind of needs in that respect. So I think it all tied in with both of them. They fulfilled something in each other, I think.
I agree with that. Well said. Well
Too.
said.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tammy. What are your thoughts about Tammy? You empathize with her just now and said, poor Tammy, didn't make any decisions here. She just had to kind of follow him around. What are
Mhm.
your thoughts on Tammy, another victim in this case? Of course, JJ and Tylee are the two children that lost their lives, but Tammy and Charles did too. What are your thoughts on Tammy?
Well, I think Tammy was a lovely lady. Everybody I spoke to thought she was really wonderful. She was a dutiful wife, probably too dutiful. She did everything for Chad. She was really the one behind the publishing. I think she did most of the work, the accounting and everything, while Chad went out, and signed orders, signed books and things like that. And they had, was 5 children, and
Mhm.
she was a good mother and everything. But I know she had problems too. I think she saw a psychiatrist at some point. She was, she was on prescription medicine because she suffered from depression, I think, too. So I don't think things were easy for her at all.
Right. I think I'd probably be on antidepressants too if I was married to
Yeah.
dad, I'll just say that.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Um, excuse me.
Mm.
Um, you you focused on Lori in the book. The book is named after Lori, the Doomsday Mother.
Mhm.
What I think one of the main questions, it's a question my husband and I ask and tackle. So I'd love your thoughts on it as someone who's researched this for a while. Who was the ringleader? Whose decision was it to murder and to commit these crimes?
Well, I mean, it's so hard to know, really. But I think, Chad set everything up with this kind of very twisted Mormon philosophy, which had nothing, it's heretic, nothing to do with Mormon religion, where they're kind of, everything's either light or dark. And then he introduced the idea of zombies and whatever. And I think, Rick Ross thinks that, the children and probably the spouses were, they were in the way of Chad being with Laurie. He wanted to be with Laurie and they were in the way. And I think it was kind of, Chad sort of set it up that they'd suddenly become, Tiny was always, I think, always dark. JJ wasn't till right at the end, but they were impeding their relationship for Chad, I think. So he kind of set things up where they were zombies and whatever. And part of their heavenly mission was to rid the world of zombies. And also, I think it was kind of put to Laurie and everybody else that it was only by killing the zombies that you were going to free these people's souls so they could actually rise to the next level. And I think that was how it was kind of interpreted. That's how I felt anyway. But I think bottom line was, they were in the way for Chad and Laurie.
Well said. I agree with you there. Um,
And there was also financial incentive too, with all, insurance. And, as soon as they die, as soon as Charles died, Laurie was on the phone to the insurance company. Unfortunately, she found out that he changed the beneficiary. And Chad did get it immediately, I think, after Tammy died. So there was this kind of financial thing going on too.
right. But they justified it through this religious
Yeah. But how
thing. Yeah.
terrifying is that when somebody can murder your wife of 29 years, to her insurance policy is one of the motives anyway.
What I want to read something else you said in the acknowledgments that I thought was interesting, and I want to ask you about it. Um, you thanked a lot of people that you spoke to, and I found it really interesting. All of the people you interviewed, you did your research. Um, you said, sorry, I'm going to find it. You said, I believe it goes back to Lori's childhood and her older brother Alex as they grew up sharing an eerie codependence. Unfortunately, Alex holds the key to much of what happened and took his evil secrets to the grave. What can you expand on that a bit?
Yes, one of my key interviews, I got very lucky. Laurie's best friend at Eisenhower High School actually contacted me and agreed to do an interview, but I had to use a pseudonym. She didn't want me to use her real name. So, and she was very, very close to Laurie. And she told me about, the time when they used to have sleepovers. Laurie got very emotional. I think they were in 12th grade. and she said, Alex tried to have sex with me, and I don't know what to do. And this girl, they were 13 years old or something. They just hugged each other and cried. And she told me that it was never brought up again. And she never went and told her mother, who might have done something about it. And it was never kind of pursued. But I think she felt kind of, in a way, that if she'd done something and told her mother what Laurie had told her about Alex, things might have been different. But I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to speculate. But then it came out later that Alex's briefly married first wife says that they had a very inappropriate relationship, and they would do sort of weird, sort of sexual things in front of the family that brothers and sisters don't usually do. And also, I mean, all through their whole lives, Laurie and Alex lived very close together. Laurie would move somewhere and Alex would move quite nearby too. So they were always within striking distance of each other. So, I mean, I think that was a key component of what happened. I really do.
Thank you for sharing that. And that was one piece of information I did not know. The friend from Eisenhower
She
and
did.
what
She
he told
told
the friend.
and she made me. I had to sign something to give her another name, actually. She didn't want. She didn't want to
I
be.
noticed that.
But she
Yeah.
has been following the case very, very closely. I know.
Thank you for sharing that. Another piece I didn't know was just a small thing. Well, I knew that Chad had a pendulum. I knew that he found it while cleaning the church house in the pews. I
Right.
knew that he took it rather than putting it in the lost and found. What I didn't know was that it was an owl. And I
Yeah.
was curious about that little piece of information. How did you learn that it was an owl?
I got that from several people. Eric Smith and Julie Rowe, basically. I mean, Eric Smith would see him in action, and he told me that he used it like a party trick. At first, when they moved to Rexburg, they go to these people's houses, and he'd do these readings with his owl. But beforehand, he'd go to the library and research certain historical figures that he would then incorporate into this kind of, what they're reading, whatever, to make them feel good. And he used this quite a lot. And I think with the ladies too, because he had quite a female following and he liked that. And he would use this owl, as a kind of a way of showing he had these special powers.
And you mentioned in the book that it was either a circle, he would see if something circled or if the pendulum went straight. Do you
Yeah.
remember that? Can you explain that a bit?
Well, I wasn't really sure. I mean, Eric tried to explain it to me, but it was a certain way of holding the pendulum, and whether it went in a circle or whether it went straight divined certain things. But to me, it was a party trick, but people, were taken in by it.
I remember playing a game like that in elementary school where they would tell you how many kids you were going to have.
Right,
And straight was one gender and circle was another gender.
right,
And supposedly I was going to have 3 girls and 3 boys. And here I am, and that did not happen, ladies and gentlemen. So, right, party trick,
right.
party trick.
But people
Um,
were taken in by him. He was very effective with that, and he got a very strong following just by having these little groups. They meet in people's houses, and he'd do his tricks and things, and talk about the end of the world. And he had a devout set of followers.
right, which would also, though, imply that it was maybe perhaps more than a cult of 2, right? I mean, he sort
Right.
of
Yeah,
started.
yeah. I mean, I think in the beginning it was, a bit much bigger cult, especially with the Preparing of People podcasts and his books and everything. But once it came, I mean, when it came down to it, after the police started knocking on doors in Rexburg and everything like that, it went down to a cult of 2, I think.
Rick Ross, and you reference Rick Ross in this part of the book, but you wrote this, that one thing that also implied this sort of cult status was how everyone was sort of willing to move to Rexburg, where the leader was.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Expand on that a bit. Is that something that Rick kind of explained to you, or that you kind of saw yourself in this whole situation, that they were all trying to head towards Rexburg?
Well, I mean, I think a bit of both. I mean, Rick said it too, but it was pretty obvious. You know, when Chad decided they went on this trip, they went on a family vacation, I think, to Rexburg, and Chad actually decided he really liked it. You know, it had a Mormon church there, and he wanted to move. He instructed all his followers that they want to move to Rexburg, and I understand that Laurie did not want to go to Rexburg. You know, she was kind of, she didn't want to for a long time, but he finally bamboozled her to do that. And it was around that time, I think, they were telling everyone who they were going to marry. You know, were pairing everybody off into couples too, you know, to move to Rexburg and get married and whatever and ride out the end of the world together.
Thank you. When you delved into this case, I'm sure you had a base of what was happening. Was there anything that shocked you or changed your thought process or direction on this case that you discovered through research? Was there something that totally threw you off as you started your, hundreds of hours of research, or was it what you thought it was from the beginning?
Oh no, I mean it wasn't. It changed all the time, I think. And it wasn't until they found the bodies that things really started to gel as to what had happened. I mean, I think sitting through that watching that preliminary hearing was just so eye-opening when the FBI, you know, investigator was just describing how they found the bodies and everything and the state they were in, what had been done to them. It was just, you know, how could people do this? You know, it's just unfathomable to me, you know. And also some of the you know, the Chad's teachings, you know, or his kind of detailed diagrams that he would send out, light and dark and different variants, and who people were in former lives, and the detail that he'd gone into, you know, that kind of surprised me, you know. I mean,
Right.
yeah, and how people believed it all, you know, how they had portals, you know, they could travel through time and space together, you know, and
That has shocked me as well, how many people believed it. As you pointed out, how many people were drawn to the party trick, how many people went to these preparing a people conferences and
right.
embraced it. That was
How is Zulema? Suddenly she thinks she can control the weather and everything like that, you know, and she's a goddess of that. I mean,
right.
April Raymond told me, you know, because April was really, really helpful. And she said when Laurie came with Tylee to stay with her in Hawaii, you know, right after she'd run away from Charles, and she would talk about Zulema all the time, you know, and thought she had, you know, what a goddess she was and how powerful, you know, how she can control the elements and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Right. I think that someone said to me once, and it's true.
Mm.
The thing that's been most shocking to her is that all of the rumors and all of these things that people speculated were actually true too, right? Like
Yes.
Zulema believed in the weather, that it was a cult, that
Yeah.
or that you control the weather, that it was a cult.
Mhm.
Um, did you what are your thoughts on Colby and all of this? For
Oh,
example, his relationship with Lori and how he dealt with it, or
oh, I felt so sorry for Colby. I think if anyone was the victim, I mean, obviously, JJ entirely and Tammy and Charles are victims, you know, but Colby is also a huge victim. I mean, growing up with Laurie in that situation and what he went through, and even when he tried to break away, I think, you know, he met this woman, Kelsey.
Mhm.
They got married. Laurie was jealous. I mean, she didn't want him to be with her. I mean, I think they felt there was a dynamic where Laurie thought of Colby as a boyfriend, you know, and it must have been so hard for him to break away from her, which he did, you know, and then to have to go through all this, you know, it must be terrible.
Right, I agree. His life has been upended, and
Yeah.
yeah. Tell me about some of the people you interviewed. You mentioned that you're allowed to say, as you pointed out, not everyone can be named. That makes sense. Same, we understand that. But those who are willing to let you use your name, you've mentioned Julie Rowe, Eric Smith, April Raymond, Rick Ross. Who else were you able to talk to with all the research you have?
I mean, Mary Tracy was fantastic. You know, she was I think she's been on your podcast a few times, I
Yes.
think, and she facilitated this too. But she was fantastic, you know. She gave me a lot of insight into Alex and the family. I think, you know, she was very, very helpful, especially her letters from from Alex when he was in jail were pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Those letters saying, about wanting someone to hurt Joe Ryan. Was that right?
Yes, yeah, they were. I mean, it was like he was going to get somebody being discharged from jail to hurt Joe Ryan, if not kill him. You know,
Right. What
and
are your thoughts? Oh, go ahead.
I mean, I think initially that whole taser thing with Joe Ryan, I think they wanted to kill him. You know, and there were other people around, you know, coming out of that, you know, visiting place, so they couldn't do it, and he had to run away. But I think it was interesting that that Laurie was actually watching everything with Tylee in the car, you know, Joe Ryan being attacked.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, how did you find that out? That was an interesting part to me. I had heard the whole story, but I didn't know Tylee had been watching.
yeah, it's in some of the police reports from then.
Oh, it was in the police reports that they were watching. Interesting. Okay.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
was an interesting piece to me. Right. The
Mhm.
Tylee and Lori were watching. Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I can't imagine being Tylee.
Oh,
Tell me about Tylee. Tell me your thoughts about Tylee. You interviewed or spoke to Echo
yeah.
and the
And
daughter.
well, the daughter, I gave her certain questions and she replied to them on. She wouldn't do an interview per se, but Echo did, you know. And Tylee just seemed, everybody loved Tylee. She seemed very, very smart, very, very sassy. I think she was kind of a, you know, she would call Laurie out a lot, you know, on what she did, you know, and whatever. And what a life she must have had. I mean, you know, to grow up with Laurie, with all that going on, with all these different husbands and things, it must have been so tough for Tylee, you know, to be her own person. It seemed like right at, you know, you could see that interview after, you know, Charles Ryan, sorry, after Charles Vallow, uh, that thing in January when
Right.
Tyler's saying she's, you know, she's just graduated and she wants to become a detective or go to, you know, police school, whatever. She had her future lined up, I think, you know, and she definitely wanted to break away, I think, from Laurie, and probably would have done.
Right. I agree that she would have
Yeah.
broke away from Lori. At the time when she was 16, I think she was looking for love and acceptance from her mother, but had she been able to live, I think she would have finally broke free. I agree with that. I agree. It's heartbreaking. Tell me your thoughts. W this is speculation, and you were very good in your book to point out what was speculation, what was fact, but I'm gonna ask you to speculate right now. What do you think why do you think Tylee's body was found the way it was found in the most horrific way?
I don't know. I can't explain it. You know, I mean, JJ was that was pretty horrific. What must have happened to him? But Tylee and the idea of, you know, they said it was completely unrecognizable, burnt and dismembered. And I think it was a mandible. They just found a part of a bone, and that was how they identified her. I mean, that's I don't know. If Alex must have done that. You know, to what extent? I mean, it's just unbelievable. You know.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Mm.
Did this book, as I've pointed out, all of these true crime books that you've written over the years, did this book take more research than other books? Or what was it like to unpack the crimes of Chad and Laurie Daybell?
Oh, it took a huge amount of research. I mean, I have right here. My room was just full of files and whatever, and trying to catalog them and whatever. There were just so many different components and moving parts to this story, you know, so many different people, so many different situations. It really was something else. And what I do is, you know, I do a timeline of everything, which takes me a couple of months, 2 or 3 months to do. And that was the only way I could break everything down and make it make sense in real time, you know. But it was quite a challenge, I must say, much more
Okay.
than other books I've done.
That's an interesting thing. I would love to know a little bit more about your process. You've written so many books, true crime books. Do you do a timeline for each book then? Is that how you
Yeah,
uh,
I'm in the
tell us
middle
a little
of
bit
doing
about your process.
well, I'm in the middle of doing one now. I mean, it takes me forever to do, you know, but it's definitely worth doing. And I end up with maybe 200 or 300 pages of single space notes of every, you know, for every quote, every action, and whatever, and I can just write, and that's basically my book. And then I write it from my timeline.
Right. Okay.
See things that
Um,
make sense that otherwise wouldn't because of the timing of them, you know, that seem totally unrelated, but once you put them together on a piece of paper, you can see, you know, they feed into each other and they start making sense.
right. You talked to Larry and Kay Woodcock a lot for this book too. Is that right?
Well, to be honest, what happened was I did speak to Kay a couple of times. Uh, we really didn't do an interview. She basically said that she was planning to do her own book, but she would help me, you know. So she kind of guided me, and she helped me go in the right direction. She actually facilitated some interviews for me and whatever, and was very good to me. I mean, I just feel so much for Kay and Larry. I mean, to me, they're the heroes of this story. I mean, without them, I think Laurie and Chad would probably be free today, you know, in whatever, doing what they're doing in Hawaii. I think it was only because of, you know, Kay and Larry's relentless, you know, pushing them and going to the police and getting them to, you know, to carry out a welfare check that this broke, you know.
I agree. I've wondered that too. Would anyone have ever noticed Tylee was missing? Or, I've wondered that if Larry and Kay hadn't have requested a welfare check, what would have happened?
Yeah, and if Kay hadn't just been on Charles's computer in the middle of the night because she couldn't sleep, just, you know, going aimlessly going through it and suddenly stumbling on lorries, you know, Amazon stuff, you know, and all those things. That was just amazing to me, you know, because that was really, I think, the catalyst that got everything moving. Because then she got the address, she got, you know, Laura's address in Wexburg, you know, and got the police to track her down there.
Right, right. This is a question that somebody sent in for me to ask you, somebody else that's read your book. She, I believe, is quoting you here. Chad would bring out a necklace during his small gathering with followers, and then they bolded this part to integrate himself with them. But first, according to Smith or Eric Smith, he would go online and research certain historical figures to pair them with during his readings. A particular favorite were the Mayflower Pilgrims. He would look up their names and backgrounds before using his necklace to mesmerize people like a cheap conjuring trick. They, I think, are just interested in that bit. Did Eric Smith say that Chad would research these historical figures
Oh yeah.
first?
Oh yeah, yeah. He went to great lengths to do that first, you know, so he could come out with certain figures on the Mayflower and say, "Oh yes, this is you in a former life," and they kind of brighten up and they'd fall for it completely. But Eric said that, you know, he would methodically research these things before his meetings, you know, so he could, you know, wow people, you know.
That's that's an interesting tidbit. It's interesting to me too because Eric Smith does seem to continue. He understands what Chet did was wrong. He says that he turned, he lust and things got to him and greed, but he still believes that Chet had some powers. According to my interview with him, he said, um, and I don't know if he told you the same thing when you talked to him, but that he said you can't doubt that Chad didn't have powers, that he could see beyond the veil. So when Eric is telling you this about him researching historical figures to pair with the people, what's Eric's take on that? I guess is my question. Did Eric see that as a gift or was Eric thinking that he was conning people?
I think he thought he was trying to, inveigle himself with people, Conning is the word. Yeah, I guess so too. But I mean, Eric did say to me that he thought originally that Chad did have a gift, to see these things. And he was a firm believer in Chad for quite a long time. So although he would see Chad doing these little tricks with the owl necklace and researching prior, he still stayed with him for a while.
Right, right. Um, yeah, he did. I know. So that's interesting to me. Thanks for sharing that. I feel like Eric is a very helpful source. I'm sure.
He's great.
Um,
And I mean, he gave me that. It was very helpful about Tammy's funeral, and that way Chad was reacting, and sorting. He went making a beeline to Eric and his friends, and saying everything's going to be all right. And Tammy's made sure that I'll be taken care of financially. Really odd things like that. And he gave me that picture, which I used in the book, Eric did, of Chad kind of smiling, at the funeral. Because I mean, I also interviewed Ben Hyde, that was in New Jersey with him as a missionary, and they kind of big. I think he lived near Chad, so they see each other in church or whatever, and they kind of had not a close relationship, but a kind of a relationship. And he put Ben Hyde in one of his books, by
yeah,
name.
he puts these people in his books. That's interesting. You spoke to him too. And what did he say about Chad?
Oh, he thought he was, in New Jersey, he was, very charismatic. Everybody looked up to him. They thought he was like the perfect missionary. They really looked up to Chad.
While you the book is written around Lori,
Mm.
the Doomsday Mother, what do you think went wrong in Chad's life?
I don't know. He's an enigma, really. Uh, I mean, I got his autobiography, obviously, and went and used that. But I really didn't know. I mean, maybe he had psychological issues from the beginning, that he always seemed to kind of sort of have to make himself large and more, supernatural to get people to look up to him, you know, in a way. It's sort of, he wanted to, and also to be a journalist, and, he's always trying to promote himself. I think maybe he had an inferiority complex or whatever, although that's a kind of a little naive, perhaps, but it's hard to say. He is a enigma.
It is hard to say, and that's, I think, one reason crime can fascinate people. How does this happen? How do people do
Right.
what they do, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything else I haven't asked you?
Not really. As I say, I think you've covered the ground, and there's a lot of ground there. I mean, one other thing we haven't really discussed is Mark Means, who fascinates me. As uh,
He is a fascinating character. You don't always see a Mark Means in your true crime novels, do you?
oh, not at all. I mean, he hasn't even had any criminal experience. But Laurie supposedly told him that, in another life, he was her son, I think. I,
Right.
I wonder how involved Mark Means is in this, or if he's just, he saw it's a great, I guess for a lawyer, it must be like the ultimate case.
Right, and now he's
Yeah.
now been disqualified.
He's
Yeah.
been quiet. I was waiting for him to say something, but maybe he will.
Yeah, I was hoping he would say something, but
Hmm.
yeah, he hasn't yet. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. He's quite a fascinating character in this whole
Yeah.
story too.
Hmm.
Well, thank you for your time. Tell us where we can, buy your book and your website or whatever you'd like to share.
Sure, yeah. My website is www.johnglatt.com, and you can buy my books on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or other internet sites.
Thank you, thank you. And what products do you have coming up? You made mention that you were writing another true crime book right now.
Yeah,
Do we get to learn what that is yet, or is it still a secret?
I'm in the middle of it's about the Murdoch family, Alex Murdoch in South Carolina.
Oh boy.
with all those. I mean, you think that Laurie Vallow is convoluted and complicated. This is even more to that effect. It's there's so many parts to this one, you know, and it grows. I've basically spent about $1,000 on printing ink so far, you know, it just grows more and more. But I'm halfway through that, and you know, that's another very interesting case.
To say the least, it really is.
Mhm.
Yeah, you must love the research. The cases you pick are not straightforward. They take a lot.
I
You
know.
must enjoy that research process.
Yes, I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. My husband and I just ordered your Turpin children's book to the family next door is what I believe it's called. We have an interest in that case, so we'll be reading that as well.
Yeah.
So thank you, John, for your time. It's so wonderful
Mhm.
to talk to you and meet you
Me too.
and, yeah, just discuss and, I'm happy to do an update one day too, if you ever also just wanna talk
Sure.
off the record sometime and share notes, I'd love to. It sounds like you might be really fully engrossed in the Murdoch case, but
Show you the
yeah.
was full of it. But no, thank you very much for having me on. You know, I've followed your podcasts and everything, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.